Hey folks, welcome back to Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and yes, it is that time again this week to present to you one of our brand new programs entitled My Story, My Words. And I'm extremely excited about the guest we have today. He's a longtime viewer of the program, a huge supporter, and more than that, I promise you, this person right here, he's going to know his stuff when it comes to transplant. I only say that because he actually is going to be our first guest so far who has a real medical background. He is a former urologist, practicing physician, all that stuff. And all of a sudden, he ended up in the same boat all of us have been in, or at least many of us, and that is in needing a heart transplant. So today we got with us Mick Shaeffer. And Mick, I'm glad to have you with us. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Jim, first, thank you for everything that you do. You've been an inspiration to me and to so many others, and you've helped me get through my journey. So, as you said, I'm a practicing urologist. Now practiced for the last almost 4 years now. I'm 69 years old presently, and I was 65 when on July 27th at 6:45 in the evening, I had horrible chest pain, and I knew right away that I was having a heart attack. Never had any symptoms 1 minute at all before, and I told my wife to turn off the TV, and I said, call 911, I'm having a heart attack. And roughly about 3 months later is when I start remembering things.
Oh, wow.
That's how it all started. It was just a snap of a finger. One moment I was on top of the world. I'd done surgery that day, and I was, as you say, I was a practicing physician. And the next day, I was a really bad off patient, I guess we'll say.
Yeah. Let me ask this. This will be a special question just for you, I guess. Having the heart attack and then knowing, well, you don't know yet what you're facing, but at that point, having a heart attack, is anything about that easier to handle being a physician, or was it that much scarier?
I guess I didn't have time to be scared,
Yeah.
number one. It probably made it worse because I knew all the bad things that could happen.
Right.
And all the bad things did happen to me. I was in heart failure, renal failure, liver failure, kidney failure. I was in anaphylactic shock, septic shock, and cardiogenic shock. I was about as close to being dead. I had CPR for 45 minutes, and usually after 22 minutes, there's no chance of living through it. So I went through the whole gamut, and I was in the ICU for a total of I was in the hospital for 5 months and in the ICU for about 4 out of those 5 months before I had my transplant.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I can understand having a little bit of knowledge there may have been a disadvantage, but at the same time, you had so much going on. There really wasn't a lot of thinking on your part, I'm sure. So very difficult
There wasn't
time.
a lot of thinking, but I had an amazing family support. My 2 kids were amazing. My wife was extraordinarily amazing, and they just helped keep my spirits up, and I just refused to give in.
Right. Have they been your caregivers pretty much throughout this ever since?
Well, my wife, especially my
Right.
2 kids are out of the house now. They're 31 and 37, I think, 30, 38.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. Tell me a little bit about how you were first introduced to transplant itself. Now, we know how you got there, a massive heart attack and everything else, but when did the word transplant come into this?
Well, I barely remember, but I think it was sometime weeks after I had been there that the doctors just said that I was so sick, my ejection fraction was between 5 and 10%, and as your viewers well know, it should be 55 to 65 percent. I was on an LVAD. I had an ECMO before all that, then an LVAD, and then my LVAD inadvertently got disconnected for 6 seconds, and so I got a thrombosis. So I had to have my LVAD replaced.
Mm-hmm.
I'm rambling. I forgot what the question was, Jim.
Well, I'm
Oh,
asking you how
introduction.
you were introduced to transplant, but if you're getting us up to that point, that's great.
Well, yeah, but then one day they said I was going to need a transplant, but I was too sick to have one at that time, and I remember just thinking, a heart transplant. Oh my God.
Mm. Yeah. It's a scary moment, no doubt about it, and it was for me and everybody else. And I think it's one of those things that I've done programs on it. You don't ever imagine hearing your name associated with that. There's a lot of things that come up in life, but you don't think about hearing your name and a transplant in the same sentence. But it happens. So,
and as a urologist, back in my earlier days, I would remove kidneys as for the donor nephrectomy. And it I never had a thought in my mind that I would be in a situation like that myself,
right.
Personally. Just didn't cross my mind.
Right. So you had been on the other end of organ transplant, particularly with the kidneys and the retrieval and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about how your journey went, because you go from heart attack at one moment, sit and watch TV, heart attack. You end up in the hospital for a period of months. You go LVAD, ECMO. When they started talking about listing you for transplant, how did that really work for you? You had to get better first to get to that. How did you end up doing such?
Well, I went through weeks and weeks of physical therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been at bed rest so long that I was so weak, I couldn't open a carton of milk. I couldn't feed myself. I certainly couldn't walk. When they tried to get me up in a chair, they had to put me in a Hoyer lift, like what they put horses in.
Yeah.
And it just to take one or two steps was just horrible. And basically with my physical therapy, I eventually worked up where I could walk 200 feet 3 times a day, but then I'd have to take a nap in between. And eventually I got out of physical therapy and was sent back to near home. I live about 4 hours from my transplant center. They had airlifted me from my local hospital to Des Moines then to Omaha. And so I had to be near enough to Omaha to get back in the proper time. So I spent from the 1st of January to the end of March in Des Moines waiting for the heart to come through. And during that time, I continued my therapy where I would walk every day. And then eventually I went through all the testing to become officially put on the list. But it was a journey.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Exactly how long were you on the wait list? I know it takes time to get on the list, to get all the evaluation done. How long were you actually on the wait list for transplant?
Well, I was back in the day when I was put on the 1A list, and I could be on that list for 30 days, and I was on the list for 29 days and 18 hours. I got the call with 6 hours to go.
Wow. So you were about to have to be re-upped or whatever it is they could possibly do. So you just squeezed in right at the end of that. Okay. So
I barely made it in.
Yeah, wait time not that long for you as far as actual listing time then, but still you've accumulated several months in the hospital and in rehab and such as that. How long was that rehab process again, do you think, from heart attack to actual transplant?
My heart attack was at the end of July, and I got the call at the end of March. So that would be 8 or 9 months.
Right, something. Okay, yeah. Okay, well, still, it's you've already been through quite a journey right there. Let me ask you a question that's kind of aside then. Being a physician and now that you have recovered enough to where I know you're more aware, you're in the hospital waiting on transplant again. How did that work out as far as, were you at a hospital that you're familiar with some of the other physicians there? Was there a little bit of an extra insider camaraderie that was going on, or how does that actually work?
Well, the hospital where I was in Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
The only connection that I had there is that my son had just completed medical school in Omaha, but he was actually a physician in Des Moines, which is why I had asked to be airlifted. There are two different hospitals in Des Moines, two main hospitals, and I asked to be airlifted to his hospital so I could be near to him, because I thought, well, they'll put a stent in me and I'll be back at work in a couple of days, and you can come in and visit me and we can yuck it up. Well, we didn't do much yucking it up, but
no, it doesn't sound like it. And being as you were in all of those failures you mentioned earlier, kidney failure, basically everything was failing. How did they go about getting some of that to snap back? Just the fact that you had the LVADs and such as that? Is that what brought that stuff back around?
Well, it had the ECMO first, obviously, and then had the LVAD, and just they gave me antibiotics for my septic shock, and the LVAD for my cardiogenic shock, and just fluids. And I was on dialysis for about 6 weeks, and before that turned around, and that was one of the worst things. Dialysis was just so exhausting for me. I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to be on dialysis forever. I guess everything, it just took a long time, and I had amazing medical support, and I had some camaraderie because I was a doctor and they were doctors, and my main doctor was a Cubs fan and I was a Cubs fan, and so he would talk Cubs talk,
right?
And my heart surgeon, he made me feel comfortable by asking me questions about urology, which I knew he already knew the answer to many of them, but he just tried to get down on a personal level with me, because he knew I was in unfamiliar territory, being flat on my back and answering the questions instead of me doing the asking.
Right. Brought you to a different perspective. What are the possibilities? And this kind of goes into the next question about how your recovery has gone. Do you have any interest in going back into being a practicing physician, or, the transplant, your age, is something keeping you from doing that?
Well, that's a very good question, Jim, and I don't know the answer yet. And part of it is going to be, I've got to let this COVID thing get over with, and I'm waiting. I may be interrupted during our talk here. Didn't know that my vaccine has come through, so I, like hundreds of millions of billions of people, are waiting for my vaccine to come through. I loved what I did. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking maybe I want to go back in some way. I don't want to go back the way I was, because I was just this workaholic sort of guy, but I have a different perspective on what it's like to be a patient now, and I think that is all through this time I have struggled with why I was allowed to live. I never asked why I had been struck down, because I knew it was my family history and the cheeseburgers. I pretty much knew why I had been struck down. That was pretty obvious. Why I had been allowed to live, because they gave me a 1 in 100,000 chance of living, and they gave me the nickname of Miracle Man in the ICU. The nurses were there. Who do you have today? Well, I've got Miracle Man.
Yeah.
And so I struggled with why I had been allowed to live, and I think my purpose in life is, well, number one, exactly what we're doing right now, getting the word out to transplant patients, and the importance of heart transplants and other transplants. But I want to explain my journey to other physicians, especially younger doctors, on what it's like to be a patient. And I don't think many doctors take the time to. I know I certainly didn't.
Right.
On what it's like to be a patient, what it's like to be on the other side.
Yeah. Well, I've presented this channel or tried to at least 2.5, 3 years of it at least. I've always said that I like to present things from the perspective of someone who has been there and is doing that, because unfortunately, well, it's fortunately they're not, but unfortunately too, many of these physicians, these nurses, these nurse practitioners, the coordinators, everybody on the other side, most of them on the other side, have not experienced it from our perspective. They've not been through that. And just having that insight, I think, would definitely give you a huge upper hand as far as not only handling your patients, but helping them to prepare for whatever's ahead. Whether you're involved with transplant directly or not, I can see that being a huge advantage.
And to that end, maybe one day I'll go out and I'll give talks to transplant surgeons and transplant coordinators, and what it's like what's like.
Now, you've already done a little bit of that, so if you can get on a circuit of doing that, that would be absolutely great, because they need to hear from people, their peers, I guess is the way to say it. They need to hear from their peers what some of this stuff that they might go through is like.
Well, Jim, I'm putting you down on my resume here.
Well, your resume may not be that good then. You may be in trouble. But so your recovery itself, we were headed that direction. I kind of trailed off and got curious. But your recovery itself, how has that gone for you?
My recovery has been amazingly easy. I know that you've had so many troubles after your heart transplant. The only thing that was difficult is that my donor was positive for CMV, and I had never had cytomegalovirus, and I had never had CMV, so I was, I guess I'll say, struck down a couple of times, where I had to go on the antiviral medicines a couple of times, but thank God I haven't had to deal with that here for 2.5 years or something like that. But other than that, I tell people that before my transplant, I could walk 200 feet 3 times a day, and within a week of my transplant, I could walk 1,000 feet at one time. And then within a couple of weeks, I could walk without my walker, and now I walk on the average of 5 to 7 miles a day.
That's great. Yeah, you have done very well.
I tell my wife I'm going to work.
Yeah.
And to figure my job is just to get as strong as I can, so I can go out and do what I want to do, because I truly believe I have been given a gift from God.
For sure.
And I need to take care of this heart, and I need to do something with the gift I've been given.
Right. And it's just gotten to be a difficult time right now with the COVID situation, and of course we'll be a year into this. Well, we are just about a year into it technically, but as far as the shutdowns of it, we're almost a year into this. And I know for me, I was going into hospitals 2-3 times a week, sitting down with patients and meeting total strangers, and all that stuff is over. I mean, except for crossing paths with someone in the clinic because we were both forced to be there, that's hard to do right now. And I hope we get back to that. I hope we get back to a place where, there'll be some safety precautions, surely, but where we can go in and sit down with people and help and educate and encourage like I have done, and you're definitely able to do.
I'm sure we'll get to that point sometime very soon, hopefully.
Well, good. What would you say, and this may be a difficult question for you, what would you say for you personally have been both the best and the worst things that have come out of transplant for you?
Well, I have to laugh when you ask me that question because I'm going to give you a very bizarre answer. They're both the same.
Okay, I'd like to hear that then.
The worst thing is everything I went through. I mean, my cardiac arrest and nearly dying and taking months and months and months to recover. The have my LVAD replaced, and gallbladder surgery, and all the physical therapy, and all the crying that I went through, and all the struggles that I had to watch my family go through. That's the worst part.
Mm-hmm.
And then the best part is I did go through it.
That's right.
And it's given me such a different perspective on life and how precious it is. And it's been a liberating experience for me. I was such a type A, I was your stereotypical surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was my way or the highway in so many things that I did, but I didn't fully appreciate what my patients were going through when I sat down and I told them that, they've got cancer, they're going to have surgery,
yeah,
and whatnot. I mean, I understood it intellectually, but it was hard for me to get on the other side there with them. And now I understand that my words or the words of a physician have unbelievable importance to that. And I just appreciate life so much more, and I understand, I appreciate God so much more. And I tell people that it's the worst thing and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, I can totally understand that, and I've gotten to that point in my life. It's taken a few bumps in the road, not just my own health, but health of my wife, my son. I told you before we started recording some of the issues they deal with the paralysis and all. And I've gotten to a point finally, I don't stay at this point, but where you can look back on those struggles and say, you know what, that was terrible. That was awful to go through. But at the same time, that was the best days of my life because it allowed me to find a strength that God's giving me that I did not realize I had, to show that I can go through some things and to get stronger every day because of it, especially emotionally, spiritually, to get stronger in that. And I think you've certainly been able to do that with these trials in your life, and now I think could really help others with the same.
Exactly. People ask me if I have PTSD from all this experience, and I say, or they ask me, do I think about it a lot?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think about it 100 times a day, okay, in one way or the other. But I don't think about it in a PTSD sort of way. I think about it in kind of a Rocky, yo, Adrian, I did it,
mm-hmm.
in a sort of way.
I like that. Yeah, flip that coin over and make something advantageous out of it.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let me insert an extra question. I'm trying to ask everybody the same questions, but you almost touched on this, so I have to ask. How can we as patients, when we go in to see our physicians, and it doesn't matter to me if it's a cardiologist, urologist, whatever ologist goes with that, how can we as patients better communicate with them? I know every character's different, but is there something we need to do? Do we need to go in and ask more questions, or how does that? I don't know. I don't even know what to ask.
I wasn't quite prepared for that question, Jim, but I'll try to give you a good answer. Well, write down every question that you want to,
mm-hmm.
and look at it, and make sure that they answer it. Now, I think as cardiologists and transplant patients, they're probably better than your average doctor. Your average doctor, we all know, they've got one foot out the door before they even get in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It needs to be your responsibility. Well, it's their responsibility, but they may not always be responsible.
Right.
So it's your responsibility to say, hold on, doc, I got another question, because if you don't answer that question, you're going to have that anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And anxiety is sometimes as bad as the actual disease itself, because not knowing is a horrible thing. And so get all the information you can so you can sleep better at night, so you know that there's good news, or you know that there's bad news.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tough on a patient when they don't know things. And one thing I found out, that if you're honest with patients and you tell them good news if you have good news, and you tell them bad news if you have bad news, is that people can accept good news and bad news.
Right.
They can't accept, we all can't accept the unknown. Just tell me what my carburetor is going to cost. Okay, then I can deal with it. But don't tell me, oh, I'll tell you when I'm done how much you're going to owe me. No, just tell me what I need to know now, and have your doctor explain as best they can until you're satisfied.
Okay. Okay, so just kind of course, we're not trying to be rude, but we're just trying to make sure that they give us that moment or two that we need to get some of those questions answered for everybody's benefit. Then it's kind of the overall gist of it. Well, I try to go into the doctor pretty educated, especially on whatever conditions I'm dealing with and whatever. Thankfully, I've got a good relationship with all of my doctors to where they know I'm coming in guns loaded. So, they come in and just usually lay it straight. There's been a handful of times, particularly with my main transplant cardiologist, I can tell if he gives me the quick, I'm turning my back, walking out of the room, that's when I need to stop him, because he wanted to tell me more. And usually he will if I stop him, but it's usually on the bad news side. He doesn't want to talk. But anyway, well, I'll move on with that. I appreciate you inserting that little bit. What would be the best piece of advice you might give someone who is either waiting on transplant or maybe shortly thereafter then?
Don't give up. Stay positive. And understand that you're suffering, obviously, but understand that your family is suffering also. And cut them some slack. They, most of the time, are going to be wonderful with you, and sometimes they're not going to be so wonderful. But understand that everybody around you is suffering, including you, and know that God willing, you'll get through this. And if you don't, I guess from my perspective on coming so close to death, that better things are going to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you just a very quick story. When they were gathered around me, I'll back up. When my wife was pregnant, we found out that there had been a twin that had been resorbed. And when my family had gathered around me, and I don't remember this story because I was too out of it, I guess.
Right.
But they're talking with me, and I said, "Who's that little girl over there?" And they said, "There's no little girl here, Dad." And I said, "Yes, there is. There's a little girl right over there." And my son said, "That's my sister." And the knowledge that I've got a daughter waiting for me in heaven, I know that there are, I'm happy to be here, but I know there are better days to come.
Absolutely.
For me and for all of us. And for all of us.
Well, that's great advice, and to hear you say don't give up is really impressive, because again, backing all the way to the beginning, the number of things you named that you were dealing with as far as all of your organs basically shutting down, being, in septic shock, whatever, typically from my experience and of course from others, when you get to that point, that's what we would consider the call in the family moments. There's nothing that can be done. But here you are, almost 3 years post, and continuing to make strides. And I don't think I'll be walking 5 to 7 miles today, but you go ahead and do that. I'm proud for you. It's been outstanding to have you tell a part of your story. My apologies that we had the difficulties a minute ago, but again, I appreciate you being here today and sharing a little bit about your story. Let me just say to anyone who's watching that I appreciate you watching, and also if you would love to share your story, I would love to hear it myself and share it with others. You can text me, reach out to me however way you want to. My number's always on the screen right here, so you can check that out and give me a text, reach out, and we'll get started telling your story. Because what these stories are really all about, I hadn't shared this yet. These stories are about encouraging people. They're about helping people to live this life and to be able to say, okay, he did it, she did it, I can do it, as well as raising awareness about organ donation. I know Mick and everybody I've talked to certainly would be a huge advocate for organ donation awareness. And we would encourage you to go ahead and do that. Give the gift of life. And perhaps that life you save may just be one of your own family members, or someone may be saving yours one day as well. But thank you so much, Mick, for being with me. Been a great pleasure to have you. And I'll be talking to you soon. But each and every one of you, please stay stronger, friends.